Hello and welcome to this video on macroeconomic objectives. So in this section of the course we start to look at the role of government and how the government can influence the economy and what it wants to achieve in terms of economic performance. And what it wants to achieve we describe as being the government's macroeconomic objectives. So for example, it would be low levels of inflation, economic growth, that kind of thing. And the way in which they can meet those objectives is through introducing what we describe as policies. So these are the tools that the government possesses to meet the objectives that they set. For example, things like changing interest rates, changing tax rates, and changing how much they spend as a government. So in this video, we're going to look at what the major economic objectives are and be able to describe in particular the UK's current economic objectives. Now, the macroeconomic objectives that most governments have, either a combination of different ones or a priority of different ones, there tend to be 7. 4 objectives tend to be based around the standard measures of economic performance, and then there are 3 more targets that some governments might have. You might want to pause the video for a second and have a quick think about what these 7 objectives might involve. Well, there are 7 main macroeconomic objectives that governments around the world might have, sometimes called policy goals. So you don't need to take these down just yet. We're going to look at specific ones for the UK in a second and a snappy way to remember them. But 7 objectives that governments might have for the economy might be to maintain full employment, to control inflation, to achieve a high level of economic growth, to keep the balance of payments in equilibrium. The other 3 might be to balance the government budget, to achieve a fair and equitable distribution of income and wealth in the economy, and lastly to protect, conserve the environment or the resources in the economy. Now we need to remember the 7 and also in relation to the UK. And the way in which I would suggest we do that is to say to yourself, Tigers B. Why? Because Tigers B is a way of remembering the government's main macroeconomic objective. T stands for trade balance. I stands for inflation. G stands for growth. E stands for employment. R stands for redistribution of wealth. S for the sustainable use of environmental resources, and B for budget imbalance. So Tigers B is a way we can remember the government's main macroeconomic objectives. So here they are, and we'll have a quick look through these in relation to the UK. So the UK government's main macroeconomic objectives, which of these are particularly important for the UK government? Well, the number 1 objective has been low and stable inflation. So the government's target for the rate of inflation is 2% per year, as measured by the Consumer Price Index. And that target of 2% must stay within a range of plus or minus 1%. So the target is 2%, but the government say the target is okay, is being met, as long as we are somewhere between 1% CPI growth and 3% CPI growth. So there's a range, a leeway of 1% either side of the target. And this target is met by controlling interest rates, which is the responsibility of the Bank of England. So the government have set the target and have asked the Bank of England to control interest rates to make sure that that target is met. And this has been the primary objective in the UK since 1997. Secondary objectives are around economic growth or unemployment. So the first one is maintaining long-term economic growth. Now there's no official target rate of growth, but economists would argue that a 2%, maybe 2.5% trend rate of economic growth would be on target. Also, maintaining full employment. Now, what that would mean is that 95% to 97% of the workforce are employed, because we're always going to have some frictional or maybe seasonal unemployment, which is very difficult to remove. So if unemployment is running at between 5% and 3%, we would say that the target for full employment is being met. A third objective, particularly relevant for the Conservative government and the coalition government before that, is to try and balance the government's budget. So currently, the government spends more than it receives in taxation, and as a result, is increasing the national debt. So one of the targets has been to try and balance that, to try and make sure that government spending is the same as taxation, although this target is not likely to be met until after 2020. Okay, a third objective, one which doesn't really have much of a priority, is balance of payment stability. So having the amount of exports the same as the value of imports. Now this is considered an objective, but in the UK it's not seen as a big priority. Lastly, if we think about the distribution of income, well, this is a slightly dubious as to whether this is an objective or not. The Conservative government might argue perhaps that an unequal distribution of income serves as an incentive for people to work hard, and if they do work hard and are successful, then to benefit from increased wealth. So they would argue that distribution of income is maybe not that important, whereas maybe a more left-wing viewpoint that Labour Party might have is that actually this is a more important objective and there should be a more even distribution of wealth across the economy. The last objective is protecting the economy, the environment. There have been some policies on environmental restrictions and legislation, things like subsidising renewable energy, protecting habitats. But again, the extent to which this is a main objective of government policy could be debated. So in this video, we've looked at the major economic objectives that governments might have, and we've discussed what the UK's current economic objectives are.